I never thought I'd find myself here, writing this, confessing what I've done. But here I am, and somehow it feels like the only way to release everything that's been eating away at me for so long. Maybe it's because I can't talk to Daniel. Not anymore. I can't even look him in the eye without feeling the weight of my own guilt crushing me. I can't turn to my friends, not when I'm the one who's been hiding something this terrible. So here I am, telling this story to no one, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone out there will understand. It all began the way you'd expect. Daniel and I were everything I ever wanted in a relationship, or so I thought. He was smart, funny, kind, and absolutely gorgeous. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate for a second. I was sure we had that kind of connection that people talk about, the kind where everything just falls into place, the kind of love that felt perfect. We were married for 6 months when things started to shift. At first, it was small, subtle. The late nights at work, the constant "I'm busy with work" excuses. I understood, or at least I convinced myself I did. He was working hard to build a future for us, for the life we were supposed to share. But soon enough, it became clear that we weren't living the same life anymore. Daniel was physically present, but emotionally? Mentally? Not really. And I was left in the background, just the wife who sat in the house waiting for him to see her again. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, the space beside me growing wider with every minute that passed. I would grab my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, looking at other couples who seemed so perfect, their vacations, their smiles, their happiness. Meanwhile, I was here, in a house we had built together, with a life we'd planned, but something was missing. It felt like a vacuum, a hollowness that I couldn't fill no matter how hard I tried. And then there was Adrian. It started innocently enough, a coworker, just a colleague I occasionally interacted with. But Adrian, he was different. He had this way about him that made me feel seen, like I mattered. At work, we'd talk and it felt effortless. He listened, really listened. He made me feel alive again, in a way Daniel didn't anymore. Adrian saw me as more than just a wife. He saw me as a person, and that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. It wasn't supposed to happen. I convinced myself over and over. But then one day, after work, Adrian asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I told myself it was just coffee, just casual. We'd talk about work, maybe life, and then I'd go home to Daniel. It would be fine. But when we sat down at that little cafe, when I looked into Adrian's eyes, really looked into them, something inside me cracked wide open. He wasn't looking at me the way people usually do, politely, casually. No, there was something more, something I hadn't seen in months, in years maybe. Desire. Real, honest desire. The kind of desire that had been completely absent from my life. I should have walked away. I should have stopped it before it even began. But I didn't. I kissed him. Right there in the middle of that busy cafe. It wasn't a simple kiss, not the kind you might expect from someone who's unsure. It was desperate, hungry, like I had been starving for it for so long. Afterward, I felt dizzy, my heart racing. I wanted to pull away, wanted to tell him it was a mistake, but I didn't. Adrian didn't push. He just smiled at me, his expression knowing, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. "I knew it, Emily," he said softly. "I knew you felt the same way." The guilt didn't hit me immediately. It came later, slowly, like a creeping fog that I couldn't shake. The more I saw Adrian, the more I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I was with him, I felt alive again. I felt like me again, like I wasn't just the woman living in the background of someone else's life. Meanwhile, Daniel, he didn't see me. He didn't even notice the changes I was going through. He didn't care, or maybe he didn't know how to care. The lies piled up, the texts, the stolen lunches, the late-night phone calls, the secret meetings. I told myself it would end soon. I told myself I would stop. But each time I was with Adrian, each time we kissed, each time I heard him laugh, I felt more like a stranger in my own life. I was living in this double world, this fractured existence where I wasn't just the wife anymore. But with every lie, with every stolen moment, the guilt grew stronger. It twisted inside me, ripping apart whatever was left of my integrity. I told myself I wasn't hurting Daniel, that I still loved him, that this wasn't what it seemed like. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't just betraying him with Adrian, I was betraying myself. The person I used to be, the person I promised to be when I stood beside Daniel and said those vows. I thought about ending it, about cutting Adrian off, about coming clean to Daniel. But it wasn't that simple. The lies had a hold on me. They had woven themselves so deeply into my life that I couldn't see a way out. Then came that Thursday night. I had spent the afternoon with Adrian again, the weight of my guilt heavier than it had ever been. The entire time I told myself I was going to end things. I'd fix it. I'd make it right. I could come back to Daniel and we could rebuild what we'd lost. But when I walked into the house that night, everything felt different. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel wasn't in the living room or the kitchen. I could hear the soft tapping of keys coming from the office, the sound of him working late, as usual. But something in the air felt off. It felt wrong. When I walked into the office, I found him sitting at his desk, his focus on his laptop. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something cold, something distant. He didn't greet me, didn't ask about my day. He just stared at me for a long moment, and then he spoke. "I've been thinking about something, Emily," he said, his voice low, steady. "You've been distant lately. I've noticed things I can't ignore." My heart stopped. I felt the ground beneath me shift. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I knew it was no use. The tremble was clear. "I don't know, but something's off. I feel like you're hiding something from me." His words were like a punch to my gut. How did he know? Was he watching me? Had he figured it out? My mind raced, panic rising in my chest. "I'm not hiding anything," I said, but I knew my voice betrayed me. It sounded weak, defensive. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Instead, he took out his phone, placing it in front of me, face up. And there it was, staring back at me. A text message from an unknown number. "You should know your wife is seeing someone else." My breath caught in my throat. The world around me seemed to collapse in on itself. The words were there, staring back at me in black and white. My stomach turned, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of my betrayal. Daniel didn't say a word after that. He simply stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me there with nothing but my guilt. And for the first time in so long, I felt truly, utterly alone.